Hi folks, today we'll be doing lesson 2 in my series on the Hare Krsna Movement, here on Lessons from the Purple Chair. Hi, and welcome back to Lessons from the Purple Chair, one intellectual's musings from the comfort of a big purple wingback. I'm your host, Professor Timothy R. Crowe. Now, in this second lesson on the Hare Krsna Movement, I want to once again go back to something kind of personal for me. We're going back to either 1974 or 75. My family cannot really figure out when this happened, or even exactly the airport it happened, but it did happen. My family had went to an airport to pick up a relative that was coming in, and while we were there, now you got to remember I'm like 4 or 5 years old, and there was all this commotion suddenly in the airport. People are all lining up and forming a line, forming two lines for like an aisle in between for these people to pass. And there was all this music and noise of cymbals and drums and these people singing this monotonous song over and over again. This Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, over and over again. And suddenly I see as this very small little boy, see these very colorful people coming down that center aisle wearing bright yellow or saffron robes, and their heads shaved, and they've got paint on their heads, and and they're playing these instruments, and people were kind of clapping. Some people were like clapping in it, and because I was seeing them clap, I thought I was supposed to clap, so I start clapping my hands. And coming down that aisle with these people in the center was this little elderly gentleman, bald, very thin, wearing saffron-colored robes, and he had these garlands of flowers around his neck. And I remember thinking at the time, maybe because of shows like Hawaii 5-0 or something, or Sesame Street Goes to Hawaii, that, hey, this guy must be from Hawaii. So, he comes walking down, and I'm standing there clapping my hands, and he sees me, and he smiles. And as he walked by, he looked at me and smiled, and he reached over and he ruffled my hair. And walked on. I never forget that. And little did I know that the Hawaiian man, as I called him later as a little boy, was the founder of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, better known as the Hare Krishnas, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, a man who come here with little to nothing, and by the time he died, about 2 to 3 years after this encounter, he had left over 20 to 30,000 followers, several hundred centers and temples, had started a publishing house for his Vaishnava books, and several restaurants and dairy farms, and a group that today, so many years after his death, he died in 1977. Now the Hare Krishna number about 800 worldwide temples and over 1 million followers of this man's teachings. So that was my, I guess, little introduction, and maybe the ruffling of the hair was a bit of maybe a blessing. I mean, I'll put it that way. But so this, and maybe it even started my later fascination with the Hare Krishnas. But the thing is, and his writings were extremely brilliant. What he wrote was very well put together, using the English vocabulary that would be understood by Westerners, and he could convey very advanced and complicated and deep Indian or Vedic ideals and philosophies in a way that Westerners could understand it, which I'll be going into a little bit later. But in truth, even though he was the real vanguard that carried this Gaudiya Vaishnava belief system and religion throughout the world. Really, he was the pinnacle or the result of and stood on the shoulders of two other gurus and teachers that began this process of passing this ancient Indian philosophy and religion to the West. He really stood on their efforts, and he, of course, acknowledged that in his own writings and in his own talks. And so we're going to go today. We're going to go over those two gurus that started this movement for the West, as well as what Prabhupada did, Prabhupada's mission, and the structure and practice of ISKCON or the Hare Krishnas within the religious movement. What exactly do the Hare Krishnas devotees have to do? What is the tenets of the religion? So I left off in lesson 1 talking about Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, the founder of Gaudiya Vaishnava, and his initiated disciples, these Goswamis of gurus that carried on his religious practice and expounded upon the philosophy of Chaitanya and the Gaudiya Vaishnava, which technically the philosophy of Chaitanya, and that was more developed and expressed by these gurus like Rupa and Sanatana and Jiva Goswami, is known as Achintya Beda Abeda, which basically means the inconceivable difference in non-difference. Which basically means that, like I was talking about with the teachings of Ramanuja and Madhavacharya, and earlier in Shankara, it is kind of a hybrid of all of these, wherein it is saying that there is this great kind of pantheistic, monistic God, this huge, not so much monistic, but this ultimate divine reality, this ultimate God, which they would see as like being the eternal Vishnu, and they don't deny that, and that we are part of that divinity, that our individual Atman is part of that divine reality. However, we still retain that individualism, and basically in saying that it is the great God is really inconceivable, but through that connection of us being our Atman, our soul being connected and part of it, that it is that difference, that non-difference. So there's a difference in the inconceivable, but because of our connection, it is non-different. In other words, it's in more simple language, it's saying that man is part and partial to the divine, that we are part of the divine reality of which are Vishnu or Krishna, that great cosmic ocean of divinity. We are a drop, but at the same time, we are individuals, souls. We have our own individuality at the same time. So we're part of it, part and partial of it. Individual souls, but part of that higher inconceivable reality. But because we are part of that reality, we can conceive. It is conceivable of that inconceivable. I hope that made sense. But either way, this is the philosophy that was expounded and grew, and Chaitanya's movement did continue. However, and it did continue down through the centuries. Chaitanya had actually prophesied that his Nama Sankirtana movement, this chanting of the Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, this Maha mantra would be performed in these with the drums and the cymbals, and these great dancing and chanting processions, Sankirtana. He said that it would be sung and performed and paraded through every city and every town and every village in the world. And actually, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada definitely made that a reality. However, as I was saying earlier in the intro, really his Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada's efforts are really the extension or the pinnacle of the work of two other great Vaishnava teachers, Gaudiya Vaishnava teachers and gurus, and that started this movement toward introducing Gaudiya Vaishnava and Krishna to the West. But first, let's go back, and like I said, and we'll talk about from after Chaitanya. Now, as I said, these Goswamis like Satana, Rupa, and Jiva Goswamis, they expounded and they started their own initiatory sampradayas based from Chaitanya, descending from Chaitanya, passing on both this Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy and the Namasankirtana practice and Bhakti Yoga. But later on, we get into the British occupation. And during the British occupation, there were a lot of suppression and a real prejudice and even racism against Hindu beliefs, the teachings, religious teachings and philosophies of ancient India. And of course, when the British came in, the Westerners came in, they saw Christianity as being the true religion and the more superior and advanced religion of the modern day. And they saw the Hindu beliefs as being, definitely substandard, inferior, and at best and at worst, they saw it as just idolatry, and super polytheism, pagan polytheism, and superstition. None of which, of course, is true. But there were, as time went on, especially in the latter part of the Victorian era, there were certain Westerners that were very interested in the teachings and the philosophies of India. And out of that, there came to be a dominance, especially as known in the West, and even some part, even in India itself, that the higher philosophy, the ultimate philosophy of Hinduism was the one of Advaita Vedanta that was promoted by Adi Shankara Acharya. This impersonal monistic faith, but said that God is all things, is the only real reality, and that our soul is part of that reality, and the whole goal is to lose the Maya, the illusion of this world that keeps us in a cycle of rebirth, and to meditate and become one, realize our oneness with the Mahatma. When our Atman is part of the Brahman, and become one with it, like a drop falling in the ocean and meld and lose all personality and identity. This was seen by a lot of these Westerners as the highest philosophy of Hinduism, and that's what was promoted. And even in India, especially among the more Western influenced Hindus and Indians, this was even kind of promoted as as a challenge, or at least a comparison to what that was seen as the more advanced and truth of Christian theology. And the reason for this being is actually a little bit of a story in itself. And by the way, all the other Hindu beliefs outside of Advaita Vedanta was just seen as that pagan idolatry and superstition, very primitive. And as you say in my first video, nothing farther from the truth. India is full of some of the most advanced, complicated, and rich religious traditions of the world. Just I have to say it. But the reason this came about was with the British coming in and the promotion of Christianity as this superior form and more advanced form of spirituality. There finally became this what's known as the Hindu Renaissance, by which the more Western educated Indians they're in this Victorian era, they and their intelligentsia, their intellectuals, they started promoting a more Indian and Hindu identity, a national identity against the British. So we're just as advanced and we're just as sophisticated, we're just as old and ancient, and our religion is is even older than yours and used in the West, and of course, and we've come up with some of these high theological concepts, that's comparable to anything that was done in the West, and Advaita Vedanta seemed to fit that bill, and it really got to be highly promoted among this intelligentsia, this intellectuals in India. This particularly was promoted by such big figures and writers as Ramakrishna, and especially his disciple in Swami Vivekananda, excuse me, and they really kind of promoted this kind of a hybrid version of Advaita Vedanta. However, there were among that intelligentsia in India of Indian intellectuals that knew very well better that there was other very advanced religious concepts in the Vaishnava and the Shaivite, and the Samkhya and all these other schools, and Shakti, all these other schools of India, and one particular gentleman, whose name was Karnatha Datta, who was from a Bengali family, from a wealthy Bengali family of landowners. And he was a bigwig in the Victorian Indian government. He actually became a district magistrate through the British Raj. And he was a very highly educated man. He had both a very advanced Western education, and Western theological education, but also he was educated in the more traditional Sanskrit and Indian philosophies. He particularly knew that of these. That there were other alternatives in Indian philosophy that were just as comparable to Christian theology. And one that he finally wanted to see promoted as kind of a comparison and even something equal to the Christian theology was Gaudiya Vaishnava, when he discovered the teachings of Chaitanya and his disciples. And he actually converted and became initiated into this group. And he began to write books and pamphlets about about Chaitanya's Vaishnavism, and the philosophy that was promoted with it. This Achintya Beda Beda, philosophy of part and partialness to the Godhead. And he wrote several books, and he wrote several pamphlets, and he did several translations. So he began a mission of going out into rural India, especially in Bengal, and teaching the teachings of Chaitanya, because by this time the Gaudiya Vaishnava had kind of denigrated in some parts to a tantric influenced kind of sexual, as some people saw as a moral version of Vaishnava, which is Sahajiya Vaishnava, which kind of harped upon the sexual relationship between Krishna and Radha, and that kind of practice. He was teaching more the pure teachings of Chaitanya and the promotion of the Namasankirtana practice of chanting the Maha Mantra with music and parade. And in fact, a lot of his translated books, he really wanted to spread this around. He actually, some of his translated books, he translated part of the Bhagavad-Gita, and some of his writings on Chaitanya. He said he wanted to show the West that Chaitanya, this figure of Chaitanya, this incarnation of Krishna, kind of similar to Christ being an incarnation of God, the Christian God, was comparable. So. And he was so Chaitanya, this golden avatar, was a comparative Christ-like figure, and he sent his books, on Chaitanya and his translations of different texts. He actually sent them to several big Western intellectuals and writers and intellectual pioneers such as Emerson, which Emerson became a big fan of this. So he really was trying to promote this, in this Bengali Renaissance that he was part of, as the Gaudiya Vaishnava was just as advanced as the Advaita Vedanta or Christian theology, and deserved to be seen that way. And he became actually very, very devout. In fact, he was finally given the name Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and he's kind of seen as a saint within the Hare Krishna movement and even in the Gaudiya Vaishnava. Well, he had a son. He had 14 children, and he had a son, which was the seventh of these 14 children, named Bimbo Prasaduta, and who had a brilliant mind. In fact, it said he had eidetic or photographic memory. Whatever he read, he never forgot. When he was an older man, he could recall passages in books, an exact chapter and paragraph from things he read when he was a child, and which really served to make him a scholar, in the Vedanta. Because remember all those texts I talked about with the Veda and the Upanishads and the commentaries and the philosophical schools and Shankara and Ramanuja and Madhava and all that, having a photographic memory really served him, because he read all that, and they started calling him like a Vedic encyclopedia. And his father made sure that he started off. He introduced him to chanting the holy name, the Maha Mantra, on the prayer beads like these, the chanting beads, when he was a very young child. Said he got a very Western education, but he ended up studying in Sanskrit college, one of the best in the world, and learning all of the Vedanta material in Sanskrit, by which he became a great scholar. He's also very good with Vedic astrology, which earned him the nickname Bhakti Siddhanta or Siddhanta, and he became an exceptional Vedic scholar. And was extremely devoted to that study. And then when he was introduced to a ascetic Vaishnava saint, Garakashara Babaji, who really had this epiphany. He had a real great influence upon him, and he dedicated his life from there to the promotion of Gaudiya Vaishnava of Chaitanya, and become a great devotee of Chaitanya. After his father's death, he actually took sannyasi, the ascetic life, basically the renunciate monk's life in Hinduism. And he like his father, who he'd help with his writings and his publications, he started his own publication, his own newsletter, and he finally founded this what's known as the Gaudiya Math. These centers for Gaudiya Vaishnava, and he was a real also was a real Renaissance man for the Vaishnava, because he through his readings, through his understanding, he wanted to eliminate a lot of what he saw as unnecessary practices within the tradition, which really had no bearing on the philosophy and the religious devotion. For instance, he did not agree with that certain classes or castes of people should be the only ones allowed into Vishnu temples. He felt that devotion and their practice and their morality more overruled birthright or hereditary right to enter these temples. He thought that everyone should be able to enter. He also felt that anyone from any class or caste could be initiated into the sannyasi, the renunciant life, or become followers. And hit a lot. This was kind of raised the eyebrows and was really in opposition to a lot of these Brahmin the Brahmin class or caste. Because not so much because of the crossing of the class lines, but because this cost them money. You got to understand that a lot of these temples, they were run by certain families who usually descended from some great saint or something, and some practitioner, and therefore they felt they had this hereditary right to these temples, and they could charge. This was a lot of money that would be involved in this. Well. Bhaktisiddhanta did not see it that way. He saw that this should not be based on heredity or who you was born, or what class that you came out of. It more went by your devotion and your practice and your morality that overrode your some sort of hereditary right. Basically the spirit, the true spirit of a man overrode any type of blood right, because blood right does not automatically entail morality, obviously. So, but now this really upset a lot of people, and in fact there was even a couple of assassination attempts on his life over this. Yeah, but also he became known as the Acharya Kashari, the lion guru, because he just did not back. Another important concept that he expounded and made part of his movement, which would be very helpful and really make a huge difference in the movement that was carried on by Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada in America, is his promotion of the ideal of yukta virajya, which basically means renunciation by engagement. Now, what this is that these sannyasi initiates, these people who took on the ascetic renunciant monks ideal, before they weren't allowed to handle money, or they were supposed to give up any type of materialism, any type of material possessions, and that type of thing. He went with this renunciation by engagement, which comes from Rupa Goswami, which basically means that rather than being completely renunciant, you could be renunciant by using material things, and whether it be money or technology or transportation, as a use for devotion. So you could use it to promote your renunciation. So therefore, with that point of view, and it kind of runs along. If everything is God, everything belongs to God, then all material things can be used to promote God. So with that, so therefore he would accept money and donations to promote that would go into promoting his organization and institutions. He allowed his sannyasi to use public transportation, they use technologies like his newfangled printing presses and making books and publications to promote the religion. In other words, all material goods went into the service of the religion, went into the service of the cause. So therefore, it changed that that material gain into a spiritual gain. And this would be very important with for Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada later on. And one of the reasons that the Hare Krishna has become quite wealthy and quite well off as an institution. And he was considered a very great guru. He had thousands of followers. He had started several centers. Some of them even he attempted to open in the West. He'd sent people to the West to try and open it, and he really wanted, like his father, to promote this ideal of Gaudiya Vaishnava and spread the Nama Sankirtana and the Bhakti Yoga throughout the West. He felt that this was a spirituality, the true nature of spirituality, the true way to God, and that this should be shared throughout the world. And he had actually tried to get several of his own followers, his own devotees and initiates, to go to the West and promote this. However, every time they attempted it, it really didn't take off. It kind of failed. One person that came to see Bhaktisiddhanta, who had got a great reputation as this true guru, and very sophisticated guru with this huge following, was a young man named Abhay Chandi, who ran a pharmaceutical company. He came in 1922 to hear Bhaktisiddhanta give a lesson and a talk. In fact, he didn't really want to go. As a friend that kind of convinced him, because he's like, most of these gurus are fakes. They're just after money. The true religion is, it's so rare to find, and true gurus. But his friend convinced him, and he was really overwhelmed by Bhaktisiddhanta when he met him. At first, at the time he was really in with Gandhi's, nonviolence resistance movement, and so he had a hard time making the spiritual connection, even though he later would say that it stuck with him, and he never lost it. And then later, little did he know that this meeting and this talk was going to change the face of the world. So let's talk about the man himself. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu made a prophecy that he said that his Nama Sankirtana movement of Bhakti Yoga would be sung, and the music heard and the chanting of the Maha mantra would be heard in every single city, town, and village throughout in the world. And really, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada made that come true. He was the answer to that prophecy. So let's talk about him now. He was born Abhay Chandi in 1896 in Calcutta. He come from a family of Bengali Vaishnava devotees, people who are already devoted to Gaudiya Vaishnava. His father and his parents were very religious, and it's said that Abhay Chandi had a real tendency towards spirituality and religion even as a child. There's a story that he wanted to start his own religious procession, and he made like the Ratha Yatra of Jagannatha, and he created his own little cart and decorated, and the kids in the neighborhood, and they put the deities on it, and they started this parade, this procession, this religious parade through the neighborhood, and all the neighbors got involved. So apparently he did have a tendency to toward this type of life. However, later on he did get a like Bhaktisiddhanta and Bhaktivinoda, he had a Western education. He attended the Scottish Church College, where he had mostly European teachers, but also there was Sanskrit and Indian teaching that was taught there. And so it's probably where he got his understanding, his knowledge of Sanskrit later on. He actually got degrees in English, economics, and philosophy. And at age 22, he married from a arranged marriage that was made when he was 11. He did get married, and he had several children. And he went on to, using his education, he started a pharmaceutical salesman company, which kept things afloat. I wouldn't say he was a wealthy man, but he made a living. However, his spirituality and his beliefs were still very strong at what he got from his parents, and he never forgot this meeting with Bhaktisiddhanta. So he started attending more Gaudiya Vaishnava bhajan practices, and he got very much involved. And finally, in 1933, he took initiation as a member with of a devotee and an initiate disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Prabhupada, whom he really idolized as a venerable, worshipful guru, and his spiritual master, and what he considered he was his spiritual master for the rest of his life. And he began writing in English for the publications, the Gaudiya Math of his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta. And Bhaktisiddhanta recognized that he was an extremely good writer, and he, like Bhaktisiddhanta's father, Abhay Chandi, could write, in a Western vocabulary that could be understood, an English vocabulary could be understood very well by Westerners. He actually told his publishers, whatever he writes, publish it. And finally, when Bhaktisiddhanta died in the late 1937, he left a letter to Abha Chandi saying, I think you are a person that has the ability to take this knowledge to the West and teach it in the English language, and promote Vaishnava and the teachings of Chaitanya and the Namas and Kirtana practice in the West. And after this, Abhachandi became even more devout and with a mission, and he produced his own newsletter with his own writings called Back to Godhead, which the Hare Krishnas, by the way, still publish. And he distributed them himself. However, his family were not as devout. His wife was, one of the intoxicants are not allowed in Gaudiya Vaishnava, and that would include not only alcohol, but nicotine and caffeine. And apparently his wife was very fond of tea, which he was very against, and she wouldn't join in the worship with him. She actually told him once she preferred tea to him. So as he got older, he finally said, in the tradition of India, where in different stages of life, you have student life, you have adult and family life, and then in elder years you devote to spirituality and religious life. He took that step. He basically left his family, his wife, who was very, as he said, was in love with tea and biscuits, and he took a renunciate life. And actually, in 1959, he took the sannyasi vow through one of the guru disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta, and they give him the name Bhaktivedanta Swami. And he never forgot this, and typical to one that follows his spiritual master and whatever he says, the same as if it came from the lips of Krishna himself. He made this determined here in older age to go to the West and spread this, which seemed insane. But this time he was a man in his 60s. He was with not a very good heart. So a lot of people told him, you can't do this, you will die. But he was determined, because that's what he's told to do. So he actually got a follower of his, an admirer of his, who owned a shipping company, to give him passage on a ship called the Jayaduta. They had a small cabin in this freight ship, and he sailed over to America. And actually on the trip, he reported to have almost died. He thought he probably had a heart attack. Maybe, don't know if it was a heart attack, but it did sound like angina that he was experiencing. And he didn't know if he was going to make it through the journey. His diary is actually very interesting to read during that period. And as I said at the beginning, when he landed in America, he had a box full of books that he had translated or was working on translating, some doll for cooking, a few cooking utensils with it, and what was about $8 in rupees, eight American dollars in rupees, and that's all he had. That and an address of some people that he knew, some families, some relatives of families he knew in India that was in America, and he landed in New York, and and this is what he started with. Well, he ended up finally getting into New York City, and he started living in the very rough Lower East Side, among the drug addicts and all of this. And he started teaching at like YMCA's and other places, offering lessons on the Bhagavad-Gita, and slowly he started getting
Now, what I find fascinating about this is that, and he had no way of knowing this, is that this was perfectly timed. If he had attempted this 5 years before, like 1960, or early 50s, later 50s, it wouldn't have took off. However, he did this at the absolute perfect time, because remember, this is the mid 60s. This is the start of the age of Aquarius. This is the start of the hippie movement. And at this time in the West, a lot of people were rejecting Western norms and society norms as oppressive and out of date. And a lot of the young people that will become known as the hippies, they were rejecting this, and they were seeking other social alternatives, of social orders. This is the counterculture time period. And in religion, they were rejecting a lot of Christianity, seeing as it's failed them, and it didn't reflect the philosophies, that they saw it as prejudice. They saw it as oppressive. Remember, this is the churches that were like in the South at the time were really for segregation and racism and this elitism. So and the love philosophies that were being promoted, within the hippie and counterculture movements. They started looking towards other religious traditions, and a lot of people were enamored with the mystical religions of India. It had this mystique, and at that time there weren't a lot of Indian immigrants. So to see not only an Indian man but also a real guru was quite a sight, was quite an experience. So from this, Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada's ability to teach in English and promote, because of his education, his Western education, he understood Western theology and terminology, and by his knowing how to use that terminology in the West, he became he became quite a personality, a very magnetic personality, and figure to this hippie movement. So these young people started coming and listening to his talks, and finally he established a storefront temple, which had been interesting. It had been a gift shop, and it still had the sign up, which was called Matchless Gifts, and he thought, that's what I'm giving is matchless gifts. So they kind of left that sign up, and from there in 1966 he established the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and with all these young people, and he started teaching them, the Nama Sankirtana, how to do the chant of the Maha mantra, which they would chant on the beads, and they were making their own beads. And from this, and he was seen as the Swamiji, the great guru, the Acharya, the one who lives by example, the spiritual master for these people, and from there the Hare Krishnas were born. He started the first Sankirtana that he performed, chanting the holy name, the Maha mantra with music and cymbals, was actually done in Washington Square Park, in Greenwich Village. But he did one. He did one in Tompkins Square Park, on the Lower East Side, and give a talk. And this talk. And this started chanting. People walking around started joining in and bringing their own music and their own musicians. Actually, part of that was filmed, and that got wrote up in the newspapers. It got spread around, and that really made it more popular. And from those beginnings, in fact, a lot of people go to the tree that he gave these lectures and started this Sankirtana there in the park. That it's called the Hare Krishna tree, and people will go there even today to commemorate it. But from there, the movement took off. I mean, and once they established a temple in a successful temple in New York, and remember, he is following this renunciation through engagement, so he could take monetary donations, and he could charge money for certain things, and he'd send out his devotees to perform Sankirtan, and ask for money and take donations, and therefore he could take material possessions and apply it to his movement, and it grew very quickly. He moved from there to San Francisco, started a temple there, really took off there. So now he's getting thousands of followers, all seeing him as the great guru, this great Swami, this representative of Krishna, and and he even attracted the attention of the Beatles. In fact, George Harrison would become a lifetime devotee to ISKCON and to Prabhupada. And he chanted the Maha mantra to his death. And he wrote this song called "My Sweet Lord," which give all the money to the Hare Krishnas. If you ever hear it, you'll hear the Hare Krishna mantra in that song. It's another famous song. So from there, Prabhupada used the money that was coming in, the donations. He started his own publishing company, Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, by which he wrote to publish all of his written work. And let me tell you, he wrote a vast amount. He was a rabid writer. In fact, he produced about 60 translations as well as his own books in that 12-year period. That's just a monster amount of work. So he also started to establish farms for the protection of cows and promotion of dairy, and they could sell the dairy products and apply it to the movement. He also started vegetarian restaurants called strict vegetarianism, not veganism. You can't eat dairy because cows are sacred, so milk and yogurt and cheese and all that. But he started these vegetarian restaurants of Prasadam. Prasadam is food offered to the gods and then you eat it. So it's like blessed food. And he opened several of these around the country. And actually he even spread it through other countries. In Germany and in Australia and in London, England, he opened temples. So he was so his dream of spreading his spiritual master's dream as well of spreading this Nama Sankirtana movement, this chanting of the Maha mantra of Chaitanya through every village and every town was achieved by Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And one thing I'll say about Prabhupada, now there were a lot of fake gurus, people taking advantage of these kids of the 60s and these people looking for new religious movements in the 60s and 70s. You got a lot of fakes out there. You got a lot of just money grabbing and con men. I will say Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta Swami Prabhupada was a real true guru. It wasn't out, even though his society became very wealthy and they had a lot of property and they were taking a lot of money. He never lived like something extravagant. He was very much driven by being a devotee. Now, he accepted the treatment of a guru, which I'm going to go into, but at the same time, he himself was just saw himself as a simple monk and a servant to Krishna and his spiritual master. That's so rare to find in the world. So, well, finally, he also started built temples and schools in India. He went back to India, especially in Vrindavan, the place of where Krishna had his pastimes, where he was Gopala and was a goat herd, was a cowherd boy, and the sites of his pastimes. And he built temples there, and actually, he was, and he had these all these trained disciples and all this, and finally, like I said, he was quite old and he was not in the best of health. Finally, in 1977, at the age of 81, He went back to Vrindavan to die, and surrounded by his now massive amount of followers in one of his temples. And there he, chanted, with people chanting Hare Krishna around him, he finally passed away. And there went the death of a true guru. Now, one thing I do want to say about Prabhupada that I think made him such a great success within his books is, as I said before, like Bhaktivinoda, he was able to use Western language to explain some very complicated Indian theological concepts. Because India has a language that can express a lot of this, like with incarnations, and demigods, and the part and parcels of philosophies, of Godhead, and all of this, and that is not so easily understood in the West. We don't really have that type of vocabulary, and a lot of earlier Indian teachers did not know how to express this to the English form. Prabhupada did, and he used very much he understood the English language to a point that he knew he could use words that could that he could convey these concepts to the West. For instance, whereas it's the debate of which God is the true God when God is just God. He said that was Krishna. He described him as the supreme personality of Godhead. Perfect. We get that. There's all these different gods, and they're all these personalities of God, because God can be many different personalities. But when God is God, He is Krishna, the supreme personality of Godhead. Perfect. You get that. He called the Brahman, the great cosmic Vishnu. He called him the super soul. And the Puranas, when they talked about these great flying beasts or flying chariots that they would use in a lot of these mythologies and these stories, he referred to them as airplanes. The different lokas, these dimensional celestial abodes of the gods, he called that planets. And what I love the most, the chanting of Hare Krishna. It wasn't just religious chanting, or prayer. It was transcendental vibration. So it's this type of language that he was able to convey some very deep and complicated Indian concepts that we could get, that the Westerners could really understand. Like, okay, I get that. It took away a lot of the mystery. It took away a lot of the complications. Like, oh, what the hell? Prabhupada was an expert at doing that. In fact, if you read his Bhagavad-Gita as it is, which is a book of about 70 pages normally, like Edwin Arnold do this translation. Prabhupada's book is about this thick. It's over 1,000 pages. Each verse he give a whole lesson on it, using this language, and even his translations he uses this language. It's with a very liberal form. I mean, his translation is true. He just uses a higher end of explanation and descriptive in that translation. So I think that's one of the reasons. And he wrote all of his books, over 60 books, he conveys that. And that's one of the reasons he is so successful. Now, a few other things about Prabhupada that I'd like to talk about, and that is, even though, yes, he was a true guru, and he was very devoted, he was very sincere in what he was doing, and he was a great scholar, very learned in Vedanta and his understanding. But his belief system was, he himself was quite a fundamentalist, of Hinduism, of Vaishnava. He was, his reality was the teachings of the Puranas, which he translated, the Bhagavata Purana, the Bhagavata Purana, which he referred to as a Srimad Bhagavatam, another name for it, which is the stories of the incarnations, the avatars of Vishnu, in particular with Krishna. But whatever they said, that was the reality. He did not believe in evolution. He rejected that. He rejected the timeline of history. It wasn't just the last like 12 to 20,000 years of human civilization. Human civilization really only about the last 6,000 years. According to him, he believed in the Puranas and the Mahabharata, and he believed that human civilization had lasted for hundreds of thousands of years, and we're in this advanced civilization, Vedic civilization. He also did not believe people went to the moon. He actually had one follower when he said this, got so upset he left. So he was very much a fundamentalist. He thought what the Vedic teachings said was the cosmic reality was reality. And also he had it has to be said, he had very traditional ideals on women. He did preach that women should be subservient to men, that men were superior, which that rankled quite a few noses. So that has to be thrown into the works. But what do you expect from a man born in 1896 dedicated to the religion of India? He was a man of his time and a guru of his time. However, I still find it so ironic that the era of the age of Aquarius, of free love and drugs and sex and this and the overindulgences of the 60s, that so many saw the Hare Krishnas as the spiritual movement of the counterculture. Because it is a very strict form of Hinduism, a very strict form of Vedic religion. So let's go a little bit into the actual practices within the Hare Krishna movement. Number one, when you become when you become a Hare Krishna, it was a communal living. You moved in with them. You lived together as a group, which kind of rankled a lot of people, seeing it sort of like a cult. That was number one. Number two, you had to follow what was known as the four principles, which is no meat eating, and which includes no meat, no fish, no eggs. Dairy, as I said, because cows are sacred, was fine. Yogurt, ghee, milk, of course, was cheese thing. That was fine. So we weren't vegan, and they still aren't vegan, but they were strict vegetarian. Also, no intoxicants. Not only does that include alcohol, but also nicotine and caffeine. So that means no drinking, no smoking, and no coffee and no chocolate. Yeah, and then of course you had no illicit sex. Now that's not just sex outside of marriage, but even in a marriage, which Prabhupada helped arrange marriages within his group. In this Vedic tradition. But even sex with your wife or your husband, it should only be for the procreation of Krishna conscious children. So you would actually, before sex, you would sit together in the bed, I guess, and you go through the beads, chanting the Maha mantra before you had sex to get the best conception, get the best soul. So no recreational sex, even with your married mate. And also no gambling of any type. So you had to follow those four principles. Other thing is you had to chant the holy beads, the japa, usually japa beads, which this is actually a set of Hare Krishna beads given to me actually by one of the gurus, one of the swamis. And you have to chant for each one, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and then go through the beads 108 times for each round, and you had to do 14 rounds a day. So that's saying the Maha mantra 1,512 times a day. That was minimal. You could do more if you wanted. Now another aspect of that, of course, the food they'd be would be prasadam. They were only supposed to eat prasadam food that had been offered to the god, to the deities, to Krishna, and then we could either make it sacred food. But another thing was that they had to follow this very Vedic idea of the guru, and it was said Krishna said in the Bhagavad-Gita, he said, "A devotee of one of my devotees is my true devotee, and no one is more precious to me." So what he was basically saying is that if you were devoted to one of his spiritual masters, one of his gurus from out of his line of initiation, which they believe that not only did the sampradaya go all the way back to Chaitanya, but all the way back to Krishna himself. So to them, the Acharya, the living example, the spiritual master, Prabhupada, was representative of Krishna himself. It was a great, so in his teachings, and you had to take initiation from a spiritual master, and once you did, you were completely devoted to that spiritual master through this line back to Krishna. So therefore, you were in complete service to your spiritual master. So that meant that Prabhupada was treated in a venerable state. They catered to his every needs. They brought him his meals. They fanned him when he sat on the cushion, the cushion teacher's throne, basically. They would help, massage him. They would help with his clothing. When he walked in to sit down, they would bow down on their faces up to when he came in to give teachings. So he got this guru's treatment. And I will say one thing about Prabhupada: he took it with dignity and without. It seemed he accepted it with dignity as part of his obligations to his followers, to his devotees. But he saw himself as just like them to his spiritual master. And he took it with dignity and a certain humility. He didn't let some power thing go to his head. That will not be true of his followers later on. So, but to a lot of outsiders, it looked like they were worshiping this man, this guru whom they bowed down to, and they revered, and they treated venerably, and they fanned, and they fed, and they bathed. They helped to dress all of this royal, venerable treatment. To the Westerns, it looked like very much like to other Westerners, it looked like a cult. But to these young people, these devotees, they're very devoted to Prabhupada. To him, he was the ultimate teacher. And in truth, they're going to have an ultimate guru teacher. He was a great one. I'll give them that. But now, in my next lesson, that's about all I've got for lesson 1 here. Lesson 2, I mean. And lesson 3, we're going to go on into the post-Prabhupada era. And definitely you want to tune in for that. Because what happened and the downfall and the survival of the Hare Krsna movement of ISKCON and the splinter groups and what all happened there, it's like a soap opera. If they made a true story movie about this, you'd never believe it. All the drama and intrigue I'll be talking about in lesson 3. So definitely tune in for that. And hey, if you're enjoying these lessons I'm giving, if you're enjoying me espousing all of this from my purple wingback, please give me a follow, give me a like, and join. Subscribe to hit this little purple chair down below and give me a subscription. And until next time, find yourself a good book, maybe one by Prabhupada. Find yourself a comfortable chair, and pursue your passion. Later.